Well, when we first got off the plane, it was really pretty crazy, to be honest. We got off, mission president greeted us, and then they took us into the parking lot at the airport, which just people walking everywhere, a lot of noise, which I'm not used to. I'm from kind of a small town. But then, when it really started getting crazy was when we got in the car and started driving. So in Uganda, the people drive on the opposite side of the road, which is one thing that's really different. But not only that, but there's really not a lot of rules there as far as driving, is one thing that I noticed, at least when we compare it to here. Getting into Kampala, it's a lot of city, and then around Kampala, most of it's city as well. It's not until you get out a little ways when you start to get to some of the villages. There's some huts, grass huts, mud huts, things that you would think of when you think of Africa. But there's also one thing that I was surprised about is that there is a lot of city, which I wasn't expecting when I was going to Africa. They're more developed than I thought. A lot of people imagine living in huts or different things like that. But honestly, the living there really isn't that bad, I would say. The mission and the church takes care of its missionaries, I can say. We do drink with filtered water all the time through the taps just to be safe. There are restrooms, there are showers. Sometimes the water will go out, the power goes out a lot at times. Sometimes food in the fridge will go bad. So you have to kind of learn to adjust to things like that. But again, the living conditions really aren't that bad. You just get used to it over time. It's just different, I can say. A lot of the people have farms, they have their own gardens, they grow a lot of their own food. I don't know, it seems like a lot of the people there just try to find whatever work they can find at the time, to be honest. Some people are businessmen, there are different things like that, but for the majority, it seems like they go and try to find different jobs that they can at the time. Not a lot of longer term careers, I could say. There are, of course, people that have that, but they're hardworking, great people. Some of the people that I met, they make bricks out of mud, and that's what a lot of people will do. They'll go and find jobs like that. So they make the brick out of mud, lay it in the sun, and let it, they put fire under the bricks and let them burn into bricks, and then that's what they build their houses out of a lot of times. And so that's just one job I can think of as an example. The children there have a lot of fun games that they make, which I think is really cool. There's a lot of jump rope, things like that. There's a game that they play with rocks. They'll get stones and play. I'm sure a lot of people know the game jacks, where you bounce the ball and pick up all the jacks. So they have different things like that with rocks, and they have to move it into a circle and out. The weather will never change in Uganda. So people say there's a wet and a dry season. Honestly, while I was there almost the entire time, I couldn't tell the difference. It's just every single day is the very same weather. And so that's something that it's nice. I mean, you never have to wonder. The only thing that will change is that sometimes it will rain. Sometimes it won't rain. Sometimes it will be dry. But other than that, it's about 80 to 90 degrees. It's a little bit humid, but not too much. It's very green in Uganda. It's a beautiful place. A lot of banana trees, you'll see that. But overall, the climate is really nice. It seems as if people can grow things year-round pretty much. So it's a really nice place to live for 2 years. So the mission, I believe that it's the second largest mission as far as land mass. I could be wrong, I don't want to, but that's what I've heard. And so it includes Uganda, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea, South Sudan. I think I said all of them, that's 5, but yeah, it's a really big mission as far as land mass goes. Most missionaries end up staying in Uganda. That's for the most part, they stay in Uganda. Currently, the work is increasing in Rwanda. So I'm sure that as time goes on, many more missionaries will start going out. When I was there, the missionaries that went to Ethiopia usually ended up staying in Ethiopia the whole time, just because it does require missionaries to learn a little bit more of the language when you go there. And so, yeah, I spent all of my time in Uganda. I was able to visit those different countries for short periods of time, but most missionaries do stay in one country. Sometimes they'll go to Uganda and then Rwanda for a couple months and then come back, but most stay in Uganda. From my understanding, I believe that the church has been there for about 30 years. Could be give or take more or less, but the church, I would say, is growing pretty well there in Africa. A lot of people that I talk to from different missions say that they end up teaching a lot of people from Africa anyway. So I can tell that the people from Africa are very ready to receive the gospel. That's one thing I notice about them. Yeah, people are receiving the gospel in Uganda very well. Just recently, last week actually, the second stake was created, which was super exciting because I served in an area called Jinja. It was a branch at the time while I was there, but that same week it was created a ward, so it's a ward now. And there are many other wards in that Jinja area that were also just pronounced wards as well. So right now, currently in Uganda, there are two stakes. The Kampala stake, and then there's the Jinja stake. In Ethiopia, there's a district, and in Rwanda, there are 3 branches. So throughout Uganda, there are a lot of different branches. I'd say it's about half branches and half wards right now. But I served mostly in branches, to be honest. I would say, first of all, that you've been called to one of the greatest missions on this earth. And I know everyone will say that for every mission you go to, but it was honestly the best experience that I've ever had. And the number one thing that I can say you can look forward to are the people there in Uganda and in Africa. They're some of the greatest people that you'll ever meet. I guess just some of the advice I can give you is, don't worry about some of the things that you may be expecting there. It's one of the greatest places to be and to live for 2 years, and I can just say that that the Lord and your Heavenly Father will be with you your entire 2 years while you're there. Yeah, so there are a ton of different languages in this mission. The mission language is English though. So almost every area that I went to, I would be introduced to new languages all the time. Going there, it doesn't require you to learn the language, though it's helpful to learn greetings and different things like that, just to kind of help you to get around and to gain the trust of the people around you. That's one thing that's really helpful. If you can just learn a little bit to kind of speak their language, they can see that you're trying, and so they'll be more willing to listen to the message that you have. My advice would be, don't spend all of your time trying to learn the language. I would say focus more on the work. But I would say that to put in a little bit of effort at least, to ask members what they know, show interest in their language and their culture, show that you enjoy learning about those things. I think it's helpful. I mean, just honestly to love the people is probably the biggest thing that will help the most. When I first got there, it was not easy to understand the people. So Uganda was colonized by the British, and so they do speak a little bit differently than we do here in America. It was really difficult for me to understand them at church, and even while I would teach them, it was difficult for them to understand me. And that usually happens for most missionaries when you go there. It takes a little while. I would say it's not so much that you have to change the accent that you're speaking in, but it's the words that we use that are different. The way that they set up their sentences, the structure is a little bit different. And so that's kind of what makes it hard for them to understand us as missionaries when we first get there, at least coming from America. Over time, though, you do get a little bit of an accent, and the way you speak changes. It becomes a little bit more simple. Just you learn to speak like them, and then they can understand you a lot better. So here, for example, we may say, "How's your day been?" Over there, they would say something more as, "How has been the day?" It's a little bit different as far as sentence structure. That's one example that I can think of. I love the people of Uganda, honestly. The people in Uganda are very, very friendly, which is one thing that I love. There you can go up to anyone and become their friend in just a matter of seconds. And that's one of the best things that I like about Ugandans. And just Africans in general. There are a lot of people from different countries there as well. They're easy to love. I also grew to love Ugandan food. When I first went or learned that I was going to Uganda, I looked up some of the pictures online, and I wasn't really sure what to expect, just because it looked like there was a lot of different kind of just mush on a plate. So I was a little bit worried about that. But when I got there, over time I was able to grow to love the food there. My first area was called moussaka, and there they would eat a lot of something called matoke. Matoke is it's a banana, but it's not exactly a banana. Most bananas turn yellow when they go ripe, and you peel them and eat them. But these matoke that they eat, they stay green. In fact, when they go ripe, they just go straight to black. But what they do is they peel them with a knife, and they put them all inside of banana leaves and then steam them. And then they mash it up, and then on top you can put all kinds of different sauce. You put chicken with broth or beef with broth, and then they've also got, they call it G-nut paste. It's pretty much peanut butter, but in a paste form, and then you put it on top of it. So it's kind of different. It's really unique, but it's an acquired taste, I could say. My favorite dish there it's called injera, and this originates from Ethiopia, though they do have different restaurants in Uganda with this dish as well. My very first time eating it, I hated it. It was, I think it was my first or second week in Uganda. I was in a group, there were, I think, 4 of us, missionaries, either 4 or 6, and they took me to one of these injera restaurants, and we sat down, and they brought out this plate of food, set it on the table, and everyone just rolled up their sleeves and started eating with their hands, like everyone on the same plate. And so it was a little bit gross at first. And it's super sour. It's fermented rice, the first one that I ate. And so it's a really different kind of a dish, but again, it's an acquired taste. It was about my 3rd time I really started to love it, and I want to have it again, to be honest. I've heard they have one in Salt Lake, but yeah. I don't know, because I've never been there while I wasn't a missionary, to be honest. As I said before, I've never felt in danger. I never felt in danger while I was there. I don't know if that would be different without the calling that I had. I could say that I've seen and experienced things that probably would have scared me if I weren't a missionary. There were things that I saw and experienced that were new to me that I've never seen before. Sometimes I saw different things, such as something called mob justice. I'd only seen that once, though, to be honest, my entire mission, the 2 years. And in general, the people there are very loving and kind and friendly. And I wouldn't say that it's a really scary place like many people think that it might be. I, to be honest, probably felt safer there than I do even here. And really, that's the truth. That's from a missionary perspective. I would say that I wouldn't have any fear going to this wonderful place. The driving is crazy. There's a lot of honking. It's one thing that I noticed right off the bat, that you can't really go anywhere without hearing honking all the time. That's kind of how they communicate there with driving. They'll use blinkers a lot differently than we use blinkers here in America. For example, if you're driving down the road and you're going to pass someone, sometimes they'll put on a blinker to their left to tell you, don't pass me, there's a car coming. Or if you'll go around, people just use blinkers when they're telling you, I'm not really feeling comfortable right now where you're at. So it seems like there's not a lot of rules there when you're driving, but in actuality there are. They're just not written. And to be honest, I was surprised how very little crashes there were in Uganda. People, I don't know, it just works. You can drive anywhere on the road, really, but it just works out. There's a system that everyone knows in their mind. It's not really said how it works, but it just works. There's not a lot of crashes, and I think part of the reason for that is because here there's so many rules, and everyone is just, it's so perfect, and there's not a lot of traffic that we can kind of doze sometimes, and I think that makes it easier to crash. But there, you have to pay attention. If you look away for half a second, it will just not be good. So I think everyone just is super aware while you're driving. And it's the first time I ever drove, I felt like I was in a video game, to be honest. It was pretty fun. We drove down the road, and there was this guy there. So sometimes you'll run into people on the streets that maybe have some problems or different things like that. But there was one particular man that loved to be on the streets, and he'd love to throw rocks at cars. That was kind of his game. And so it was, like I said, it was a lot like a video game the first time I was driving, trying to swerve through all these obstacles and start driving with a left hand on the stick shift for the first time. Just all these things all at once. It was pretty crazy. We were just getting done with the day. We were coming back from teaching a lot of different people, and we were walking back to the truck that we drove there. Sometimes missionaries have vehicles there, and we were coming back, and we were just crossing the road, and as I said, the driving there is really pretty crazy. And there are these things called bodas, and what they are, they're just motorcycles pretty much. So I was just crossing the road, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this motorcycle coming right at me at full speed. And then, I don't know, for some reason, while it was coming, I never felt in danger at any time, to be honest, during any time of my mission. And that's one of the great blessings and miracles that I can say that happened for me, is just I was able to see the hand of the Lord in my life as far as protection goes and safety. I never felt in danger at all, ever. And when this motorcycle was coming right at me at full speed again, I still never felt in danger. And of course the motorcycle hit me. And the miracle that happened, I can say, that really stood out to me is that while the motorcycle hit me at full speed, it was almost as if like someone just barely bumped into me. And what had happened, surprisingly, is this boda or motorcycle ran into me and kind of pushed me back about 5 or 7 feet. And in fact, the motorcycle and the guy on the motorcycle itself fell down. But me, I just stood there standing, and I just kind of helped him get it back up, fixed the things that were bent on it. I was like, sorry about that. And I was like, I hope it goes well. I felt bad because his motorcycle was a little bit bent up, but the Lord definitely protects His missionaries, and that's one thing that I can say. I definitely felt the presence of angels around me throughout my time on my mission. And if there are any missionaries going to this mission that are maybe afraid of that, it's one thing I can say is that the Lord protects His missionaries, His servants. And I know that. I would say the number one thing always, it goes back to obedience and following the commandments of the Lord and His standards. That's one thing I really tried to do throughout my 2 years. And I noticed that there's a great power and strength that comes from following the standards in the White Handbook that we are given as missionaries. As it says in the scriptures, when we do what the Lord says, He's bound, and He will protect us. And He wants to protect us. I've learned He wants to give us those blessings, and He just simply asks us to do those things so that He can give us those blessings, and so that we can experience and see those miracles. I think He wants us to experience those things at times.
So it's the Uganda Kampala Mission. It has 6 countries, so it's Uganda, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Sudan, Eritrea, and Djibouti. When I got there was only missionaries in Uganda and Ethiopia with a service couple in Rwanda. And then my last transfer there, the first 2 proselyting missionaries went to Rwanda. In Uganda, there's 1 stake in the capital city in the surrounding suburbs, that's Kampala. And then there's a district, if you go to the east, in an area called Jinja. And then the rest is just, mission branches. There's about 5,000 members in Kampala, or sorry, in Uganda, or that's how many there were when I left. There's probably a significantly higher amount now, but and then there's 600 members in Ethiopia, and Ethiopia has 1 district. They have some pretty beautiful chapels there, and also a couple in Uganda as well. And then there's just a branch or 2 in Rwanda. I think there's a military branch in Sudan and a military branch in Djibouti and Eritrea. Languages, there's 50 plus tribal languages for both Ethiopia and Uganda, and so I'm sure it's the same for Rwanda and Sudan. It was an English-speaking mission, but we taught with a lot of translators because not everyone knew English, depending on where you were serving. In northern Uganda, where one of the areas I served in, there was significantly less English speakers than in southern Uganda, and so we taught with translators more often. And then in Ethiopia, the area that I served in was a small village in southern Ethiopia, and so there was maybe 6 to 10 English speakers in the whole area. So we taught with translators every single day until our translator left to prepare for his mission, and then we just we taught ourselves how to read and write their language, and then we would just read to them and then say the basic phrases that we knew. So when I got there, we stayed at the assistant's flat, and then we had trainings with the mission president all day the next day. And then we went to, we met our trainers, and then we went to our separate areas, and on our way we stopped by an Ethiopian restaurant, which was my first official meal in Uganda, which is funny because it wasn't Ugandan food, but my trainer had spent about a year and a half in Ethiopia and loved it, loved the food, so I had Ethiopian food and then went to my flat and was just overwhelmed. And then the first week or so was just the weirdest experience, just walking in a completely different world, it felt like. The weather in Ethiopia, when I was only there for the last 4 months of my mission, and probably the first month, there wasn't a single day that I went home dry. I think that was partially because of the area that I was in. I was in a very rainforesty area, very lush and green. Not a lot of what people think of Africa when they think of Africa, but so it was just, we'd rain on and off all day, and then we'd go back home soaking wet and change clothes and do it again the next day. Yeah. If you go north more in Uganda, it gets significantly hotter. I don't know the exact temperature. It's 45 Celsius or something, I think, was some of the hottest, I think. But it didn't rain too much, but you could tell when it was raining, it just started getting really windy. And once you felt the wind, you knew you had about 5 minutes until it started just pouring. And usually it would pour really hard for about 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes. I don't think I ever saw it rain for more than an hour straight, and it'd be really, really torrential rain pour, and then it'd just disappear, and then it'd be fine. Being white, I mean, I'm not trying to sound racist, but being white, in a way made us a target, but also because we were foreigners, the general public would look out for us because they'd either assume we didn't know what we were doing, or just that, we're not aware of customs. And so not that we'd break customs, but just there's general respect for foreigners. So we didn't get targeted. I personally didn't get targeted a lot by getting jumped or attacked, or none of knives were pulled on me. But there was always those random people who just really did not like white people. They always associated white people with Americans, even though there was some white people. There was a South African, some other people that weren't American, but it was always associated white people with Americans. So sometimes we'd just be walking around, people would yell, "Go back to America, we don't want you here," and then they'd threaten us, but we knew they didn't really, maybe they meant it, but they weren't going to do anything because there was too many people around who were respectful of us that they couldn't have got away with it. I feel like petty crimes are pretty common, maybe like theft and stuff like that. But there's a great justice system there. It's called the mob justice, and so that keeps major crime down, at least from what I've seen, just because if the public doesn't like what you do, then they'll take matters into their own hands instead of waiting for policemen or government officials to punish people. So if you get caught stealing, they usually will not treat you kindly. For instance, on Mother's Day, I had been calling and talking to my parents, and then I went out with one of the bishops in the ward I was serving with, and I was just telling them how nothing too crazy has happened recently, and we've been safe. And then we just saw a guy who walked across the street naked and kind of beaten up, and the bishop said, "Oh, he looks like he just got caught stealing." So they would, strip him and beat him and then send him on their way. So because of punishments like that, I feel like petty crimes, people didn't do them often if they thought they were going to get caught. I know it happened because it happened to me. I had a couple things stolen, and I know other missionaries got stuff stolen, but it was pretty safe as far as getting attacked. There was several riots while I was there. There was a presidential election for President Museveni, and some people were not excited about him potentially being the president for another term, and so there was a lot of rioting. On riot days, we'd get sent back to our apartments, and we'd be locked in, and we weren't allowed to leave. We had to call in and report to make sure that we were safe, and the police usually took care of that pretty quickly. They just tear gas everybody. So I don't think no deaths because of that, at least none around me, but a couple missionaries got tear gassed and because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time, and every once in a while you hear missionaries share stories of someone getting attacked, but it wasn't too common. In Lira, one of the northern villages of Uganda, there was a strong anti-American sentiment due to some previous pastors from America that had come and kind of tarnished the American name according to those people. So it got a little sketch there. I had a Kenyan companion who got hit in the face because he was walking with me because I was American. And people would yell stuff at us and threaten us and shove us around, but it wasn't like we never got fully assaulted except for that one time where my companion got hit, and the guy was completely drunk out of his mind, so he probably wouldn't have done it in a normal state of mind. In Ethiopia, the village I served in, for the most part, it was really calm. It's known some tribal warfare for the past 3 or 4 years, and so sometimes those different groups would get angry with each other, to put it nicely, and attack each other or retaliate, but they wouldn't ever focus on us. It was always just different tribes that were fighting against each other. One experience that I had, and this is not a common experience, that probably would happen 1 in a million times. We were at the wrong place at the wrong time, but there was a festival for one of the tribes, and they were celebrating their strength and their greatness as a tribe, and we were on a donkey chariot riding from one area to the other, and our driver was from the wrong tribe, and he was disrespecting their procession. They had a couple hundred people, maybe 400 or 500 people walking through the road in their tribal gear. It was more traditional. It wasn't like actual war gear, but they had their spears and they had their hats and stuff like that. And he just kept on driving the donkeys into the back of the procession, and they kept on telling him to stop. And so finally they kind of got fed up, and they pulled him off the chariot and started beating him, and then they started trying to tip our chariot. And so they pushed us down a hill, and we jumped out of the chariot before we crashed, and then they surrounded us and just kind of, I don't think they meant harm. Maybe they were kind of in a frenzy, but they were smiling at us as they were surrounding us and jumping up and down with their spears. So it felt kind of scary, but the fact that they were smiling, either they were smiling because they were happy they were surrounding us, or they were trying to scare us and show us, I don't know. But luckily someone happened to be driving by, which was surprising because that was a really unfrequent road, and a lot of people have cars there. Not a lot of people do. So this guy drove by and saw us surrounded, and he kind of drove into the procession a little bit to get people away from us, and then he opened the doors and let us get inside, and then he shut us in the doors and locked the doors. It was a great experience. It probably will never happen again. It's not common. I never heard of anyone else having that happen. We just had a bad chariot driver who was not respectful of people and what they want, I guess. So for the most part, it was really calm there. A couple times we had to leave just because there was tribes attacking the other. So we'd see people going by in trucks with 15 or 20 people in the truck bed with guns, and we'd say, okay, time to go. Because we lived in one area, and then we took a 30-minute bus ride to our area. So if we heard anything like that, we'd just jump on the next bus out of there. And the locals would know that there was trouble, and they'd want us to get out of there because they didn't want us to be in the wrong place. And usually, so even if their bus was full, they'd stop and let us on. Or people would say, hey, you need to get out of here. Things aren't good. Come back tomorrow. It'll be fine. It's just some stubborn people. But people were good at watching out for us. Uganda is broken up into a lot of different tribes, and each tribe has a king of their tribe. Those kings are more just figureheads. They don't have a lot. I mean, there's a president of the country, and he has his ruling body. So the kings don't have actual say in legislation and stuff like that, but they're very respected, and so the president will respect them, and they could get access to the president if they wanted to. If they needed to tell him something or talk to him, they're well respected and taking care of people. And so, although they don't have real political power for the whole country in their domain, the president kind of gives them way to do what they want. So for culture, when people ask you to eat food, you should eat it. They get really offended if you don't eat it, and they'll usually get offended if you don't eat all of it, although they understand more so for foreigners that maybe you're not used to their food or you can't eat as much as they expect you to. But typically, and I made a promise, whatever someone puts in front of me, I'm going to eat it. And then if I have something that I know makes me sick, I'll let them know, hey, I can't eat this because it makes me sick. But typically, you always eat whatever they give you. Oftentimes, when you go visit a family for the first time, or even a family that they'll go and buy you soda and crackers, and even though they probably can't afford it and it's not in their budget, you can't refuse it because it's just disrespectful. So if anyone offers you soda or drinks or crackers or biscuits or whatever they offer you, you usually try to drink all of it and eat all of it just to show them the respect because they've made the sacrifice and they've spent money that they really can't afford to spend on you. It would be hard if sometimes people would get us when we're fasting, and so you have to tell them. You don't want to tell them you're fasting, like, no, thank you. You try to catch them. You can kind of see when they're gonna leave and go get soda. They'll hand money to their daughter and send them to the shop or something, and so you'll catch them like, oh, are you going to get soda? We can't drink it right now, and so if we could try to catch them before they bought it, they'd be grateful and they'd understand that we're fasting. They're very, very familial. They'll drop almost anything to go. People will drop anything to go visit their family. If their family's sick, if their family needs help, whatever it is, people will visit their family and they love their family a lot. One of the biggest things or challenges is that people send their kids away to boarding schools because it's the way for them to get the best possible education. So we'd be teaching families and their kids would disappear for 4 months as they go to some boarding school really far away, and then they'd come back and be like, oh, okay, they're back for 3 weeks and they're going to go back again for 4 more months. So that was kind of hard, and it was worrisome because the students would not have any formal instruction, and usually the boarding school would be a Catholic or Protestant, and they'd be forced to go to that church every Sunday. And so it'd be hard for them if they didn't have a strong testimony. Something that was kind of a joke is if you were teaching someone you couldn't find them, you'd say, oh, they probably went to the village, just because people would randomly disappear and then come back through because, oh, I was in the village visiting my family. They'd give no warning. It's just, oh, I was in the village, or I went to the village, or someone would disappear like, hey, where's this person? Oh, he went to the village. When's he coming back? I don't know. Just kind of people just go to the village, and the village was usually their home village where they were born and raised, and people have, because if you live in the cities and you can't afford rent, then you go back to the village because you own the land there and you can live off the land there. You have what they call a garden, which it's more of like fields of food, not just a garden, what we think of. It's just like, oh, I have my tomatoes and my zucchini and I'm growing my own food. They grow actual food that they can live off of in their garden. So when people started struggling financially, they would move to their village and stay there. Other culture, it was kind of weird at first getting used to it, but people will shake your hands and they'll hold your hand while they're talking to you the whole time. So you'll shake someone's hand and they'll just hold it there for 10, 15, 20 seconds, and I was like, what's going on here? And it took a while to get used to that, but then it was fine. It's hard to think of stuff off the top of my head. There's so much culture there. It's great. I love it so much. So you really learn to love the people and everything that they do, and even if they sometimes frustrate you, whether they're not accepting the gospel or they're being stubborn, it's great. another joke that missionaries would have is, "Oh yeah, I'm coming in 5 minutes," because people would say that you'd make an appointment with someone for 3 o'clock, and then you'd call them at 2:50, and they, "Are you coming?" Like, "Oh yeah, I'll be there in 5 minutes." And then you call them at 3:15. It's like, "Oh yeah, I'll be there in 10 minutes." Like, "But 30 minutes ago you said you'd be here in 5 minutes." Like, "Oh yeah, I'm coming. And then you call them, and then you just after 30 minutes they're not there. He's like, "Okay, I'm giving up." And then you call them, "Oh, sorry, I was coming, and then I stopped coming." I was just like, "Are you kidding me?" But so that's another joke that missionaries go, "Oh yeah, I'm coming. I'll be there in 5 minutes." You say that when you're 10, 20 minutes away, because they say what they want, what you want to hear. It's like, "Oh, he wants to hear that I'm almost there, so I'm going to say I'm almost there, even though I'm not." So that's very common for people there. In Uganda, they have 3 staples. They have rice, then something called posho, which is corn ground up into a flour, and then you boil water and you slowly add it, kind of like a cream of wheat, but until it solidifies into something that looks like mashed potatoes but tastes nothing like it. It's just a thick white blob of bland and tasteless stuff that it's very filling, and it's really cheap to make, so that's one of their staples. But they'll add sauces to it to make it flavorful. And then the third main staple is matoke, which is giant green bananas that they boil and mash and make them kind of into like a paste. Not really a paste, it's thicker than that, so it's not like a spread for bread, but it's just mashed potatoes but made out of bananas, I guess you could say. That's the best way to describe it. That one, depending on who prepared it, was good or bad. So I probably ate rice and beans a quarter of my daily for a quarter of my mission, just because you could go and buy a plate of rice and beans for 75 cents to $1, depending on how much prices had inflated that day or that week or that year. So and then if you wanted a nicer meal, you'd get like some chips and beef or chips and chicken, French fries, so chips and beef, or rice and beef, or rice and chicken, and that would be like $2 a plate, and could be really good or could be really bad depending on what kind of meat you got, stuff like that. For breakfast, I would usually I'd buy eggs and just fry them into like an omelet, and then cook them and put them on toast. Or you could buy a box of oatmeal for a couple bucks and use that. I'd buy bread and make toast. For dinner, we usually cooked at home. If we ate dinner, we didn't eat dinner until like 9 o'clock at night when we got back, so we didn't have dinner appointments almost ever. So we just eat lunch at 2, and then just wait until we got home at 9 o'clock, and then in between reporting and closing the day, we'd make a quick meal, usually beef or something nice. We'd go and buy it from the butcher, so you could go to the butcher and say, "Hey, I want that cut of meat," and then he just cut it right off the cow and then cut it into pieces for you and then throw it in a bag. And we weren't supposed to do that. I don't think our health advisor was very wary on the things that we ate, but we did it anyways. So they had something called chapatis and Rolex. Chapati is kind of like a tortilla. They mix flour and salt and some oil, and then they fry it in just on a burner or something like that, on like metal plate that's over coals. And then we would use that as a tortilla. So if we'd make beef stew or something, or if we'd make hamburger meat, we'd eat it with that, just kind of like a burrito or something. And then they had something called Rolex, where they'd fry eggs into an omelet, and then they'd put it on top of the chapati, and then they rolled up like a breakfast burrito, and they'd put eggs and cabbage, onions, tomatoes, green peppers, stuff like that. Those were good. Those were also not allowed because the people who prepared them were very unsanitary, but it was probably the most popular meal for missionaries. Just if you want a quick lunch or a quick dinner, you could get 2 of them, or two to 4 of them for $1, depending on what size and who was charging you and if they wanted to gouge you or not. Other interesting foods, just like grasshopper, there's cow intestines, stuff like that. I don't know what else. There's a lot more food than that in Uganda, but that's the gist of it. There's also something they ate a lot of fish, and they'll just dry it out in the sun, and then they'll feed it to you, or they'll smoke it or fry it. I don't like fish very much. It makes me sick to my stomach, because I didn't like the fish, and I tried to avoid it, but if they gave it to me, I'd usually eat it. Oh yeah, the fruit there is awesome. In Uganda, they have the best pineapple I've ever tasted. I don't like pineapple here anymore. I'm spoiled. I just actually last week I had the first pineapple that I've said I actually enjoyed this pineapple, and I shouldn't be like that because I know it's going to be hard to get back to Uganda, but It's just really high quality, really tasty pineapple there. Really good bananas. They have the little miniature bananas that are like this size. They're really good. And then some other bigger bananas. Have really, really good mango in Uganda as well. And when members would give mango, oh, it was the best. They don't write in English characters. They have symbols instead. And so everything is phonetic. So they have 33 symbols, basic symbols, and each one of those symbols represents a consonant sound. And then they have a few symbols, maybe 5 that represent what they call explosive letters. So you have like ka and then ka, or ta and ta, or cha and cha. And so they have 29 basic symbols and those 4 or 5 explosive symbols that are used for different words. And then off each symbol they have 7 variations, and those represent the vowel sounds. So you'll have a symbol for be, boo, bi, ba, be, bi, bo, and then ke, ku, ki, ka, ke, ki, ko, and then de, du, di, da, de, did, do. So every symbol has 7 variations, and those represent the different vowel sounds, and that covers almost every single sound that you can possibly make. They don't have something for the, like th. So if you wanted to write English words with their symbols, you can't write the. There's a couple of other sounds that they don't have, but for the most part, there's about 200 and something symbols. I'm not sure what the math adds up to. 33 times 7, yeah, 231 symbols, something like that they have. And so I made it a goal when I got there to be able to learn how to read and write within the first 3 weeks, because I was only there for 4 months. And so luckily the area that I served in, we had a 40-minute bus ride to and from our area. And buses stopped running relatively early, or earlier than 9 o'clock at least, and so we'd have a little bit of extra time to study language at night. There was no language training, so whatever we learned we had to teach ourselves, and every companionship was supposed to have a translator, but of my 3 transfers there, I only had a translator for one of them, the first one, and then after that it was just me and my companion mostly reading. So since I learned how to read in the first 3 weeks, and it started really slowly, and then I just practiced every day and built up until I could read as well as the average Joe. And so when we teach lessons, we just go, and if we didn't have a translator, we'd greet them with what phrases we knew, and then we'd say, okay, we have a lesson for you. Can you pray? It's like, Ntsale, can you pray? And then they'd say, yeah, they'd pray, and then we'd open up the Book of Mormon, and the area that we served in was a village, and so most of the people there actually couldn't read or write. They could only speak, and so they couldn't even read it either, so we'd have to read for them. And so we'd read a verse, then we'd read a second verse that connects to that verse, and we'd read like maybe 5 verses and kind of throw in some words that we knew, and then we'd say, thank you, we'll see you next time. But yeah, so it's a really fascinating language. Like the name of the church is Yehualanyok en Kadusan Jesus Christus Beta Christian. That's the name of the church. The way I learned most of my vocabulary was like just reading First Nephi side by side in English and Amharic. So I had a book that I made, or just a notepad that I had, and I'd read words, and I asked our translator before he left for basic vocabulary. So he taught me like the Holy Spirit and Jesus and God and prayer, and basic terms that I could recognize as I was reading. And then as I was reading verses, if I saw a word or symbols that formed a word that I'd seen before, and if I'd seen it multiple times in one verse, I'd then go to English and say, okay, this word was in here 4 times. What word in English is in here 4 times? And then I'd kind of piece it together until I had a dictionary of about 10 to 15 pages of just words and phrases that I knew. And so I made it through all of First Nephi, and then I left my journal in a taxi and lost all of my dictionary and all of my work for the past 2.5, 3 months, and I only had a month left, and so I was like, and you know what? I won't keep a journal anymore. I'll just try to remember it. And I wish I had tried to start a new journal, because I can't remember most of it now. It's been so long, but yeah. You say salamno is greeting, or salamno is for a male, salamnish is for female. You can say kenu detno is how is your day, ken is day, and then indetno, or indet is how is it, and then no is at the end. You'll kind of, it just doesn't always have a meaning, but you'll just say no at the end of something. Say like salam no, peace is it. It's kind of, they don't have direct translations, but so you say salam no or salam nish, and then enu and detnu, and then if you want to know how work is, you can say Sarah and detno. Amaseganalo is how you would say thank you. Yegzabier is how you say God. Jesus Christos is pretty simple for Jesus Christ. Bet a Christian is church. Bet means house, so it's just house of Christians. When I could give you like an example of ordering food. You know, if we go to a restaurant, we want something. Let's say an tipsfurfer bija. No, an tipsfurfer ke double gar bija was like, I want one tipsfurfer, but I want bread instead of the spongy material, which is injera. I don't know. I'm really rusty. It's been a long time. I used to go to, order food, and I could teach very basic lessons. We'd take a flip chart with us, the one that you see over there, and we just put through the pictures, and I knew how to speak enough that I could get through the first discussion. I could teach the restoration through pictures and broken phrases. Counting. You want me to count for you?
Sure.
An, tulet, sost, arat, amis, sedist, sebat, semint, zetain, aster. That's 1 through 10. And after that, you just add asarant, asarhulet, asarsost, asarat. You just say 10 plus the number, and then 20 plus the number. And yeah, that's counting. And then I guess in the area that I served in, there was also a tribal language that was just as common, if not more common, than Amharic. So phrases for them would be like, instead of saying salamna, you say kero. And instead of saying how are you, salamnish or salamna, or enuendetno, you'd say fayot. Instead of asking, like for asking, do you have any questions when we're teaching, we'd say tiakale. That'd be for Amharic. And then in the tribal language, it would be datmanoi. So a lot of people think, oh, there's not language, it's just dialects, but they're completely different. I mean, you have tiakale and datmanoi, and then you have salamno or kero, and then you have enuendetno or fayot. So, I don't know. One of the phrases that they'd use all the time is da'abusho, which is I'll die for you. That's what it literally translates to. But it's just like really, really respectful. And so you'd always just, oh, da'abusho, da'abusho. And they loved it when they say that. If you get somebody who's like, quiero fire da'abusho, and they'd be, oh, and they'd like start laughing, and they'd throw their hands in the air. They'd be so excited, like, oh, Ferengi, which is, well, foreigners, like, Ferengi. Then, they'd be so happy that, that we said something like that. Super respectful. When you're greeting people, you refer to them as father if they're an older man, or mother if they're so you say, like, to greet an old man, you say tanastalin abat, which abat is father, and then tanastalin is just like a very respectful form of saying how are you. And so he's like, oh, tanastalin abat, and you shake their hands really slowly, and just show them a lot of respect. Another cultural thing is when in Ethiopia, the way they would greet is you'd shake hands, and then they'd pull you into a hug, and then if they really, really liked you, and if you knew them really well, they'd hook their head behind you. And so there's a couple of people who just, I got to know really well and I loved, and every time they greet me, they say, oh, quiero fire da'abusho, and they'd grab me and pull me in, and they wrap their head around me, and they start nuzzling the back of my head with the back of their head. It was quite interesting. That took a lot of getting used to as well. But it was great. And by the end, I'd just see them, and I'd beat them to it. I'd go, no, quiero fire da'abusho, and, nuzzle the back of their head with the back of my head. It was great. So, yeah. Yeah, depending on the area you were in Uganda, there was monkeys in the, trees at the churches, so you could feed monkeys and hang out with the monkeys. There's wild animals. I saw some hyenas, some missionaries, depending on where you went. If you went to the northern parts of Uganda, there were some game reserves there, and some animals would wander off, and so you could, if you're lucky, you could see a giraffe or maybe an elephant or something like that. I spent a lot of time in the capital city, so I didn't see as much as that, but there's a lot of insects. And one of my apartments, I'm not sure if they didn't completely finish the walls, but it was a wall up to halfway, and then there's just metal bars to protect it from the other way. So there's grasshopper season, and we'd have hundreds and hundreds of grasshoppers in our house, just flying everywhere, laying on the walls, and people would eat those grasshoppers. They'd take off their wings, then cook them in oil and salt them, and then eat them they were like a dessert. So there's lots of grasshoppers there. Mosquitoes, lots and lots of mosquitoes. In Ethiopia, we had really bad bed bugs. In my apartment, I probably got 20 bites a day, it felt like. Just every day I'd wake up covered in more and more bed bug bites. So, yeah, that's about for bugs and animals, I guess. In Ethiopia, their staple is something called injera. And so what it is they get teff, which is kind of like rice. They'll make it out of teff or rice, and they'll make it into like a something like that paste, and they'll let it ferment, and then they'll pour it and fry it on a grill, and then it turns into this giant like a sponge, and so you tear with it, and you don't use your knife, or you don't use a knife or fork or anything like that. You just use your hands. You tear it and you pick up meat with it. And they put all different types of sauces on it. So there'll be like lentils or beans or just a spicy sauce or a chicken sauce or a beef sauce, or depending on what you want. And you can order it in like a million different varieties. They have like a mixed dish, which is like macaroni noodles, and then cabbage, and then tomatoes, and then meat, and then beans. And so everyone would share a giant platter. And the platter's about like that big, and you just tear it off and grab it and then throw it in your mouth. And tradition there is, if they wanted to respect you, they'd feed you. So they'd tear it off for you and then put it in your mouth and feed it to you. And that was like a form of respect. It was disgusting the first time I had it in Uganda, and the first 3 or 4 times, and it really grew on me, and then I loved it. It was delicious. My favorite dish is called tibs furfur, and they'd soak the sponge in this meat sauce and then have chunks of meat in it, and then they'd tear up more of the sponge and throw it on top, and so a giant mound, and so it just really, really good. Sounds disgusting, I'm sure. Fermented rice made into a sponge with nasty sauce, but it's really good once you get used to it. And then they had the area I served was in a village in southern Ethiopia, and they had they just drink it's not cooked, milk that's really old, maybe 20-30 days old. It's just clumpy and rotten, and whatever comes after milk, it was almost to that stage. And I had that once, and then I got a bacterial infection, so I didn't drink that. So if you go to Ethiopia, don't drink the milk unless you know it's clean. And they had a cultural drink called kanito, which is just really, really bitter. I didn't like it at all. A lot of missionaries loved it. They say it's just, you either hate it or you love it. But I didn't like it. It was just this purple drink. I don't know what they make it out of. And then most of the restaurants that you go to, they have these steamers, and so you can get fresh milk there, and then they'll steam it and make it warm, and then they'll add sugar. And so that was one of my favorite things to get, is just like this really hot, near boiling, kind of like sweet milk. So in Ethiopia, we didn't have a lot like sliced bread. So if we wanted to buy bread, it was more like rolls. That was almost like a baguette, you could say. And so when we were eating food there for breakfast, we'd fry up eggs and then mix them with potatoes, and then get these baguettes and just tear it up and eat it together. I only ate 2 meals a day in Ethiopia because I got so sick in my area that when the food there was, the restaurants there were kind of sketch. So we weren't told not to eat at them, but I just ate a big breakfast and then ate a big lunch. And then big breakfast, big dinner, skip lunch. I'd buy maybe some bananas or some guavas, stuff on the street, and then eat that. But yeah, in Ethiopia, they didn't have half that stuff. They didn't have mangoes that I saw very often, or they had bananas, but more common was guavas, at least in the area I was serving. So you could buy 50 guavas for $1. I'd buy, it's 1 birr for 4 guavas, and it's 17 birr to the dollar. So I'd buy for a 17th of $1. I'd buy 4 guavas, and then I'd buy a couple bananas. It was great. I loved it. And they had some really good strawberries there. If you just got called to the Uganda Kampala Mission, you are the luckiest person, because despite what other people tell you, it's the best mission out there. People are going to claim theirs are better, but it's not true. Uganda Kampala Mission is absolutely amazing. First of all, I'll start with a piece of advice. Just love the people more than anything else. Go out there with a desire to help them and to bless them and to serve them. My wife makes fun of me and says I'm chunky all the time because of how often I tell her about families and people I met out there, and relationships that I will never forget because of how wonderful the people there are. They're humble beyond belief. They taught me so many things about how I need to be so much more humble than I am. So yeah, love them and respect them and treat them the way that you would expect the Savior to treat them. And if you do nothing else, then you'll have a successful mission just by learning to go out there and love those people. I know that the church is true, and the gospel of Jesus Christ is true no matter where you go. Practices might be a little bit different there. Things are not the same. Maybe sacrament meetings might be different than you expect, but it doesn't change the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel of Jesus Christ is true. And while the members there are new and don't know all the practices and all the traditions and all the things that we believe and teach in the Church of Jesus Christ, they do have testimonies that Jesus Christ is our Savior and that this is the church where His priesthood authority is found. So help them, guide them, love them, and respect them, and you'll be able to make a difference there.